industry and since May last year. So I'm a relative newbie to the sector. So I've spent, I guess, the first 6 months with Breedon learning about quarrying, learning about the difference between hard rock quarries, sand and gravel, and then the processes that we go through. And it's fascinating, you know, what goes on your doorstep, but you don't know anything about quite often is really, really interesting. I'll touch a little bit on my career. My career, as was communicated a few minutes ago, I started offshore at the bottom of the chain, if you like. I was what they call a roustabout. And so if it moved, I greased it. If it didn't move, I scrubbed it or painted it for 3 weeks, and then went home for 3 weeks and got drunk to then go back out 3 weeks later and do the same again. And that was good for a young guy. And then I kind of worked my way through the operational chain. In oil and gas, there's a bit of an expectation, if you want to progress, that you're going to spend a little bit of time in health and safety, whether it's as a safety rep or a couple of years doing health and safety before you then kind of move back into operational stuff. So I got that opportunity, and I moved into working in the health and safety field, and I never moved out of it. And some of what I'm going to talk about today will probably explain a little bit of why that is. But for me, health and safety isn't all about legislation. It isn't all about statistics. It isn't all about rules. It's about people on the ground and our people principally that operate in our industry in the highest risk environments. So what I want to talk about then a little bit is we talk about safety culture. And safety culture is a huge topic, and we'll have different views and ideas of what we mean by safety culture. So I'm going to touch on that a little bit. I'll talk about a safety climate as well, or a health and safety climate, and I'll try and explain what I mean around that. I'm going to give some examples from in industry, some examples from history as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about leadership behaviors and the impact that they can have. And then I guess I'm going to touch on how that all comes together to make a difference on the ground. If you bear with me a second, I'm going to share my screen. We practiced this a few minutes ago, so hopefully I can still figure it out. Okay, can you see my screen? Somebody a thumbs up? Yes. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so this is what I'm going to talk about, particularly in high hazard environments, but a few different industries. I've given you a quick introduction as well there. Bear with me in the kind of stories I tell. This isn't going to be me going through statistics and numbers and case studies and things like that in detail, but it'll be talking to some of my knowledge and learning over the years through the oil and gas sector, the energy sector, and then where I've taken some of the most pivotal learnings from and what they mean to me in terms of how I work in this sector now. So if I was in the room, I would ask this question of the room. I know there's a chat going on as well there. Does anybody off the top of their head know what this aeroplane is? Okay, so this is a B-52. So there's a famous band named after it. Was built in 1952. It's a bomber, probably one of the most successful military planes in the air. They actually expect, it's so well built, they expect that the bombers or some of the bombers that were built in 1952, which are still flying today, will still fly in 100 years after the day that they were built. So in terms of engineering and technology, that's a fantastic piece of kit. Now, technology's advanced in terms of the onboard kit and how bombs are dropped and how the navigation systems work. But the principles of the plane are exactly the same now as they were then. A B-52 bomber shouldn't look like that, ever. And in fact, that photograph is a photograph of a bomber just before it crashes in Fairfield Air Force Base on June the 20th, 1994. And you'll see why I talk about this in a second. There were 4 people on board. Tragically, all 4 of them were killed. 3 of them were the same rank. And this is a really important piece here, right? So theoretically, there was no hierarchy on the plane. You've got 3 people of the same rank in a military environment, and this exercise took place. The pilot put the plane into this position. The pilot's name was Arthur Holland. He was known as Bud, and he was considered the best B-52 pilot in the Air Force. And it was kind of felt that he was untouchable because he was so good. However, it was also known that he'd damaged planes in the past. He'd actually flown them to the point where he'd written them off when he landed them. Okay, so this was known by senior management, but because of his reputation in the industry, then he was untouchable. He actually took one of these planes and stalled it above a ball game in the US to prove that it could be done with tens of thousands of people in it, and then flew it away. So he was a guy that just took risks, to the point where his commanding officer refused to allow him any of the squadron members to fly with Holland unless McGeehan was also on board the aircraft. Now, this was the day before Bud Holland was going to retire. So he was able to take these guys up. When they did the investigations and looked at the situation, what they came out with was essentially the culture that was in the, apologies, I'm moving a piece there so that I can see the full screen. A culture where they essentially disregarded procedures, but also there wasn't a culture where they could intervene and stop when people did that. If they had if you like, a social hierarchy and they were seen to be untouchable. So in a high hazard environment, that's really, really dangerous, right? That's a really bad place to be. Okay, I'm going to see if I can get rid of this window for myself. There we go. Perfect. Okay. So keep that in your mind in relation to culture and behaviors and leadership, because they all played into that situation. I don't know if any of you have ever seen this. This is the Parker Hudson safety culture maturity model, if you like. It's a simple model that talks to how cultures in an organization can be understood, if you like, in the simplest of forms. So if I started at the bottom, pathological, we may have people in the workforce whose view is, who cares as long as we don't get caught, we just need to get the job done. And then you've got reactive, it's important, we do a lot every time we have an accident. Calculative, we've got systems in place to manage all hazards. Proactive, we've got leadership and values, and we drive continuous improvement. And then you get up to generative, the top. HROs, high reliability organizations. Health and safety is how we do business. around here. It's essentially woven into every single thing that we do. Now, what's interesting with this ladder is as you move up the ladder, you become more informed as an organization in relation to what's going on. And you develop higher levels of trust, and people take higher levels of accountability in relation to what actions they take. And that's demonstrated through numerous papers to be at all levels in an organization, right? So where we need to be in any sector actually is trying to move up that ladder. And that might seem logical to simply look at that, but actually the journey up that ladder is really difficult. And I'm sure in your own organizations, you could look at this and say, well, you know, we've got parts of the business that would sit in more proactive. Actually, we've got some parts of the business that might be quite reactive. We might even have the odd behavior that's pathological. We might have some absolute excellence, you know, where we would consider it generative. So we sit on this ladder kind of trying constantly to move up. What's really, really important here is that our workforce, the people at the sharp end, the people in most hazardous position, it doesn't matter where we think we are as managers, as leaders in an organization. What matters is where they think we are, because their perception is their reality, right? And they will behave according to their perception. And we'll touch on that in a little minute as well. Okay. So I said I was going to talk about the climate as well. And I'm going to give a couple of examples here, but if I was to show you, you know, a window and you're in the house and you looked outside and you saw the window looking like that, you would probably look to grab a jacket, maybe an umbrella before you went outside. You would expect that it's raining out there, and that's a reasonable expectation to see that. However, maybe that's not the case and someone's washing the windows or whatever it is. The point I'm making here, though, it is that perception and reality are sometimes different. But what we can do is we can set the climate in our organizations. Changing cultures takes years and years and years. And in fact, in some cases, you can't really have that much of an influence on a culture. And an example I'll give of that, I worked for a number of years on a shipbuilding project out in the Far East. And we had a view that we were going to go over there, huge focus on health and safety. We were going to go over there and we were going to influence the culture, and we were going to make it the safest site that we could. And we were going to spread that culture wider into the local community, and the local community would become safer, and they would benefit from the work that we were doing there in that way. The problem we had was that when we got there, we did all of this great work. We would give people the best of PPE. As an example, they took the PPE away, took it home, and then they came back without it. And they took it home. In some cases, they sold it. In some cases, they used it for other things. I've seen hard hats used for carrying water. You know, and the point I'm making here is that culturally, the country that we were operating in, we were never going to be able to change that culture in the relatively short period that we were there. And we were there, I think the project was 5 or 6 years, and we expected that we were going to have a massive impact on that. But we couldn't. But what we could do is we could set the tone when people came through the front door of the shipyard. So when people came in, you know, if they didn't wear the PPE appropriately, then they didn't get to come in. If they didn't follow the processes, then, you know, we did some further education with them. On occasion, we asked people not to come back to the site. But what we did was we determined what it was going to be like when you came through our front door. So within our area, we could control that. An example I sometimes give of this as well, and you'll all be aware of this. Some people have a show home. Might be some people that are on the call just now that have exactly that. I've got a 3.5-year-old and an 11-year-old, so we definitely don't have a show home. There's toys and rubbish everywhere. But when you go into a show home, when you go into someone's house that's immaculate as you walk through the front door, one of the things that you do is you immediately look to take your shoes off. And you'll take your shoes off and you might walk into the living room and you'll be conscious of how you're moving. You might sit down on the couch, but you won't lounge back in the couch. What you'll do is you'll sit on the edge of the couch, right? And if someone gives you a drink, a glass of water, a cup of tea, a coffee or something, and there's a table in front of you, you'll immediately start to look for a coaster before you put it down. So our environment and the perceptions of our environment determine how we behave on the ground. And you know, to put that in the kind of quarrying world, there are some sites that I've been to, some of our own sites, where I've walked into the workshop and there's piles of rubbish here and stuff here, and it's not tidy. And I've spoken to the manager and the supervisor there, and we've had a great discussion about stuff that's going on. And I've said, you know, what are your biggest challenges? Oh, well, we get the, you know, subcontractors come in. They come in and do some maintenance on the equipment, on the mobile plant, and look over there. There's a pile of stuff from I think it was Finnings was the example. Pile of stuff from Finnings, rubbish, empty boxes and things like that piled over to one side. And he said, well, look, they've just left that. It's a tip. They leave it a mess all the time. And I took the chap out of the shed, and we went and we had a look at some of the landscape and looked at some stuff outside. And then I took him back in and turned him round and said, right, go and now have a look at your shed. Look at your workshop. And there was stuff all over the place. And I said to him, so why would you expect Finnings to behave any differently when they come in? They won't. They'll fit in. They'll conform to the environment that they're in, right? There's quite a funny picture. I'm sure some of you have seen it before. But this, you know, a shipyard out in the Far East. You know, why would we be surprised if people behave like this if we don't keep things in a nice, safe state, right? And if we don't pick up on that, and as leaders, you know, we have an opportunity to have an impact on that. So we can have quick impacts on our safety performance and how our operations take place. You're not changing the culture, but you can change the climate. And over time, if you work hard on the climate, then the culture will move with it as well, and it will start to improve. Okay, I want to talk about leadership now. I don't know if any of you are aware of who this gentleman is. Some of you, if you're budding engineers or keen engineers, then you may well be. And the picture on the right might give you a clue. But this is a chap called Joseph Strauss. Joseph Strauss was the lead engineer on the Golden Gate Bridge. And when the Golden Gate Bridge construction project was put together and Joseph Strauss was asked to lead the project, it was normal to budget for an amount of deaths on a significant construction project. So I think the budget for Golden Gate Bridge was around 32 million. So significant spend. But the anticipation, therefore, was that we would have one death for every £1 million spent. Now that sounds horrendous, right? Today, of course, it sounds horrendous. But you know what we do today and how we work today in 10 years will sound horrendous as well. And that's that journey that I was talking about earlier on that we're on. But what we have to be willing to do is do things differently. If we want to change and move things, we have to be willing to do things differently before the tragic accident takes place, not after the accident takes place. Okay, so Joseph Strauss went on to the project, and what he said was that everybody who's on this project will tie off. So when they're working at height, they will have a rope around their belly, a belly rope, and they will tie onto a fixed point when they're working. Now, let's not get into the merits of a piece of rope versus a harness and the value of a harness. We know that, but it was a step forward. It was a massive step forward. He also made everybody wear hard hats, which they had never been told to do before. And he also underslung the bridge with a safety net, so that if people fell off the bridge, then they would be caught in the net. And actually, it became a bit of a club to join. If people had fallen, they joined what they call the Halfway to Hell Club, if they'd fallen off the bridge. The bridge project had, in the end, it had 11 fatalities. So they had estimated 32, they had 11. All 11 of those fatalities that took place in one event, and there was a scaffold collapse on the bridge, and it was towards the back end of the completion of the project. The scaffolding collapsed, it ripped through the netting, and sadly 11 people perished. But the point here is that if Joseph Strauss had just accepted what had gone before him, then he wouldn't have stepped up and said, no, we're going to do things differently. And it takes us to look at things and say, look, we need to do something different here to change what's going to happen in the future. And we need to have faith that making that change is the right thing to do. And that's a challenge sometimes, because if you're, in your eyes, if you're performing well from a safety perspective, what's your justification for making a change, for doing something differently? What you don't want to do is wait until something goes horribly wrong to justify the change. And that's unfortunately how the health and safety sector works, if you like. And we need to move more progressively in that. And Joseph Strauss arguably was well ahead of his time in what he did. So that, for me, is leadership in action. Okay. But then what do? We've got to, we get into what is the leader's challenge then? What's the hardest piece around this? And you will all recognize this on your sites. So, simple model: investment in and attention to health and safety protection. Okay, and you'll notice I use the word investment. If you're ever talking to your CFOs or your accountants and they ask you about what health and safety is costing, please do everything you can to change the language that you use with them, right? Because it's not costing them. It's an investment in the future. It's an investment in things not going wrong. The true costs, as we all know, are when things go horribly wrong. So we need to change the mindset in business and in industry that actually it's not a cost to do things safely. It's an investment, okay? But there's a line to tread, right? Because then across the bottom of the chart, I show you productivity and profitability. And of course, this is really important as well, right? Without a business, without productivity and without profitability, you don't have a business. So you've got to walk this line in the middle, and that's the real challenge. Now, the reason that I call this the leader's challenge is because the messaging that leaders give in organizations directly impacts the behaviors of our managers and supervisors, and our managers and supervisors' behaviors directly impact the behaviors of the guys at the sharp end. So it can be as simple as how we respond to a shutdown, to a failure. It can be as simple as how we respond to someone stopping a job. And it can be as simple as how we react to something going wrong. And that it's really important that you get that response correct in any given situation, because if you don't, what you do is you show them what's really important to you. And if all you're doing is driving to get the plant back up and running, I guarantee you they will see productivity and profitability above safety, irrelevant of how often you tell them that safety is the most important thing. And it's this parity zone, it's this line down the middle that we've got to work. And we call this, and you will be aware of it, but the integration line or the ALARP line. What's as low as reasonably practicable? The problem with the ALARP argument is that quite often we go to what's called as low as regulations permit, and we say, yeah, but we're compliant with the law. It doesn't matter if you're compliant with the law if it goes horribly wrong and you kill someone. Okay, so it's an important piece to be aware of and an important line for us to tread. Okay, I'm going to touch on something else here. I can't see you on the screen, but if I had you in the room, I would ask the question if any of you recognize what this is. Some of you may, some of you may not. It's the BP Texas City disaster. So essentially an oil refinery which had an explosion on it and killed several people. What's interesting is that when the investigation and the public inquiries took place in the States around this, they got to a point where they were looking at the mistakes of the operators and the supervisors and the people that are doing the job. But what they said was that the BP had missed the underlying and significant cultural and human factors and organizational causes of disaster that have a greater preventative impact. Now, I found it really interesting when I joined Breedon. So one of the first things I did when I joined Breedon was I started to look at the statistics, the numbers, the stuff that I said at the beginning. I'm not going to focus on, and I'm not going to focus on. But I started looking to try and understand if they were telling us anything, if they're giving us a picture, if they're showing us where our big hitters are, where our real problems are. And when I started looking into the root causes of lots of our incidents, the root causes came down to individuals. So about 80% of our incidents, the investigation had found that the individual had made a mistake. We'd trained them, it had been an error, they'd cut a corner or whatever it was. And I'm kind of scratching my head looking at this, thinking to myself, is that really the case? Or is there a reason that people are making these mistakes? And when you do incident investigations, if your investigation lands on an individual that's made a mistake, you probably haven't investigated deep enough, right? Because there are circumstances, there are situations, there will be custom and practice, there will be a plethora of other things that have led to that point, which relate to the culture of the organization, the climate that they're operating in, and the leadership that are around them. And if you don't find those things in your investigations, then you're probably not going to have a significant impact on reducing the likelihood of those things happening. I'm going to check in at the end of this and ask everybody if this made sense. And if you all shake your head, I know I'm in real trouble. So hopefully that's not the case. Another thing to consider is something called the knowing-doing gap. And I see this quite frequently in life in general. And I could ask you the question, do any of you speed in your cars? And most of the room would put their hand up and say, yep, you do. So the knowing-doing gap is really, really simple. What it is about, what you should do, but you do something different. And what is it psychologically that makes us do that? And here are some of the reasons, right? We judge ourselves by our intentions, where others judge us by our actions, okay? And we have a tendency to explain the actions of others by their personality traits, Well, we attribute our own actions to the circumstances. So just have a think about that for a second, right? We judge ourselves by our intentions. So this is what I meant to do. However, or this is what I meant the outcome to be. However, others will judge us by our actions, what actually happened and when, when something went wrong. But when we say we have a tendency to explain the actions of others by their personality traits, it's the sort of thing when you turn around and you say, oh yeah, but Davey's a really good guy. He won't have done that on purpose. Or, he's always grumpy in the morning, right? Whereas if that was us as individuals, we'd blame the circumstances around us that had driven us to that. So we need to understand this knowing-doing gap, right? Because we all do it, and we all do it all of the time. It's a common thing. And you will do it in your daily life. I gave you the driving example. I guarantee you some of you have picked up your phone in the car and looked at it, and some people in the room or on the call will have sent a text or taken a call on the hands, or driven without a seatbelt. There's loads of examples of this. I quite like this little cartoon at the bottom. We've got a knack of overlooking our own faults, and actually for us to get better as an organization, everybody needs to be able to look in the mirror and look at that. And that's a massive leadership challenge for us as well, right? Because we believe as leaders that we should know everything. Actually, high reliability organizations have something called defaulting to expertise, whereby they accept and understand that the people at the sharp end quite often know the better solutions, and they go looking to bring them out. So that engagement with your workforce and pulling that forward is important. Okay, I'm going to move on, a little conscious of time and a few more slides to get through, hopefully before some questions. Number 38. It's unlikely that you'll recognize this person, but this is a lady called Kitty Genovese. And I'll come back to the number in a second. This chap is a chap called Winston Moseley. And Kitty Genovese was tragically murdered on March the 13th in 1964 by Winston Moseley. Moseley was a 28-year-old bartender, and the attack took place over a sustained period. And the Moseley attacked her. She screamed in New York City, and there was some people shouted out of windows, "Shut up, keep the noise down," whatever. Moseley went away. He went away and got changed his hat, came back, found Kitty, dragged her away, and essentially finished the murder and sexual assault at the same time. The number 38 is the number of witnesses that there were to the event. And this was quite profound, right? Because what this starts to do is explain why people don't act on what they see. And this is obviously the most extreme case. But there was 38 witnesses that heard, looked out of the window and saw something, and none of them phoned the police. And I find that just fascinating from a psychological perspective. I find it fascinating that would be the case. And then, what goes through my head is what about in the workplace when we see something that isn't quite right? What do we do about it? How do we normalize it and allow it to continue? And what is it that drives us to do that? And the research into this case in particular, and then a number of other studies that were carried out, came up with something called the bystander effect, which is essentially where we will literally watch something go wrong in front of us and not intervene and not challenge it. We all think we would, but we don't. And there's a number of reasons for that. But if we want to tackle health and safety in this sector, this is an area that's really, really important. The oil and gas industry, in particular, went into a lot of depth around not just this case, but this theory around the bystander effect. What is it that prevents people from intervening and stopping? And you know, we notice that something's wrong, and we interpret it, and we ask ourselves the question, am I needed? So 38 people asking, am I needed in this situation? And then we can either assume responsibility, should I intervene, or do we diffuse our responsibility, right? Is it the bystander effect? Do we assume someone else is going to do it, right? Or do we not have the confidence to take action? Are we worried that we're going to challenge someone who knows better than us, or we're going to get it wrong? Or is there peer pressure? You know, if I'm the guy that goes over there, or if I'm the girl that goes over there and intervenes and stops them doing something, how are they going to view me and see me? And you know, this phenomenon is really interesting. And when you put it in a high hazard environment, it becomes really clear where the problems are and where the problems come from in terms of your culture and that side of things. But for me, this sector, and I'm going to touch on some of my observations, this sector needs to really tackle this element and look at it. And I'll explain why I say that, and I'm happy to take criticism after this. These are just my views from 8 months in the industry. But ultimately, we need to act and intervene and do something about it. Okay. I'm going to give you an example here. I touched on the oil and gas industry, a sector that I worked in for many years. On the left-hand side, you've got something called the Ecofisk complex. And on the right-hand side, there's an image there that shows in the center, you can see the Ecofisk complex, and you can see that tank there, which is the same as the tank on the left of the photo. And then the platforms there that are bridge linked together, and there's a drilling rig in there. The wider area is what's known as the Greater Ecofisk area or Greater Ecofisk field. And what it is it's various platforms, subsea installations, which all feed into the Ecofisk complex. So in terms of production, Ecofisk is a hub. The reason I wanted to talk about this is because how organizations, how leaders behave when something goes wrong can really, really generate a positive outcome on your culture and your cultural journey in terms of safety. So I was on Ecofisk doing what's called a frack job. I think most of you will be aware of what fracking is. May have heard of it on land. It's common offshore. Frack jobs take place quite a lot, and a vessel comes alongside, hooks up some high pressure lines. You rig up what they call treating iron, which is heavy 3-inch or 4-inch treating iron, normally rated to about 15,000 psi. And you pump fluids down the well at anywhere from 40 to 60 barrels a minute. And some of the fluids are quite nasty. Anyway, that's a frack job offshore. In order to rig that up, you've got to tie into the top of a wellhead. We were on Ecofisk on the main production platform, which you can see right in the center of the complex there. That's Ecofisk Charlie. And we're in the well bay, and we had a scaffolder alongside, and he's building the scaffolding around the wellhead so that we could get up. And it was a cold morning. I think it was January or February time. It was about 4 a.m. And there was a valve operated, a 30-inch valve with an automatic actuator, valve operated, and when it operated, there was a mist, if you like, a fine mist for about 30 seconds that emitted from part of the valve, and there was a chap on the scaffold, and it was his first trip offshore, and he got off the scaffold, thought there was a hydrocarbon release. All of his training had told him, if you see, anything like that, then hit the emergency shutdown. So that's what he did. So we were all in the well bay. He ran out, hit the emergency shutdown, big red button, and the deluge came on. The entire platform started to shut down. The deluge, by the way, on an oil and gas platform now, certainly since Piper Alpha, it's like they're trying to empty the sea on top of you. You can hardly breathe. There's that much water being distributed. The alarms are going, emergency lights have come on. We make our way along the bridge links back to the hotel platforms. The one in the foreground here is one of the hotel platforms, and the one in the far left is also a hotel platform. So hundreds of men come in from all of the platforms. On top of that, all of the wells from the Greater Ecofisk field start to shut down, because like Piper Alpha, what you don't want is oil being fed or gas being fed to an emergency. So that's all built in automatically now offshore. So they all start to shut down and production shuts down. There was nothing wrong. The valve was operating the way that it should operate, and there was no issue. The important thing here, and it was ConocoPhillips at the time that were the operators, was how ConocoPhillips responded to that. Because they'd shut down the biggest oil field in the North Sea and in the Norwegian sector. It would take about 4 to 6 weeks to bring most of those wells back online. You can't just open the valve and bring them back on, you damage the formations. About 4 to 6 weeks to bring it back online. So we're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of lost revenue. The way that ConocoPhillips dealt with this was they essentially flew a helicopter out, and they took the chap who was a scaffolder, and they had town hall meetings on all of the different platforms in the field, and they brought him up on stage, and they shook his hand, and they essentially recognized him for behaving exactly as he should behave in that situation. And what they acknowledged was that they got it wrong. They got it wrong because they didn't educate him enough to understand and know what was going on around him, so that he wouldn't act in that way. And what they essentially said at the end of it was, that's exactly the behavior that we need to see when our people on the ground see something that they're not happy with, but that they're not comfortable with. So in terms of cultures and where an industry is and where an organization is, that's a great example of that in play and in action. And a question I would ask is, do we think that any of our operations across our patch would behave like that if we shut a site down for weeks and weeks because we'd picked something up? Maybe they would, and that's great, but I think we've got some work to do in that area as well. Okay, so I'm going to touch on this industry now. I'm going to touch on a couple of things that have stuck out to me recently, that I think give some idea of some of the challenges that we have. So articulated dump truck ADTs, we've got tippers on them, and all the training that we give states that the skip must be lowered completely before moving, apart from a short distance to clear a load. And I'm not going to answer, I'm not going to give a definitive answer on this, but the question we have to ask is does that happen all of the time? Or actually, sometimes do we move away with the skip up and lower it as we go? Because culturally, if we've got a culture whereby we allow these things to happen and take place in our sector, then that's only one place, right? That will be happening in lots of other places and different things. So getting to a point where you've got a compliant culture is a key in the journey. And when I have conversations with people about this topic, I often have the discussion, yeah, but the drivers have been doing it for years and years and years, so they know what they're doing. Or but there's nothing that they can catch the skip on as they're driving away. Or I'll hear people, you know, maybe point out that yeah, but it's only so and so that does that, and it kind of doesn't matter really. What it is evidence that we don't operate always in a compliant manner, and you know, this isn't about skips up on ADTs. This is about, do we always comply with the rules that sit in front of us, or actually do we not? Stock loads, this is another interesting one for me that's kind of come to the fore recently. But if a load sticks, you know, if I talk to guys out and about, what's the action that we take? And the action that I've heard people describe is that we might move the truck forward and hit the brakes, or we might move it backwards and hit the brakes and lower it. And release to try and release the stuck load. But I've seen a number, and I've been in the industry a short period of time, but I've seen a number of either articulated tippers or fixed tippers tip over, break the ram, tip to one side. And these things really stand out for me as situations that just shouldn't be happening, right? And it's very, very clear what we should do in the event of that. But then the question comes, well, yeah, but then how do we release the load? We're asking the wrong question. How did we get the load stuck in the first place? Right? And this is that root cause analysis piece. This is this going back to the causes of things. A lot of drivers, how they exit their trucks, you know, do they exit forward and jump off the bottom step because they do it 3 or 4 times a day, or do they actually turn around and climb down? These seem like small things, but these are indicators for me that we've got work to do with behaviours and people, and then we've got work to do with management and supervision who watch this stuff happen and we don't tackle it. So there's work to do in that area. So some observations, and I'm looking forward to coming back on camera in a second and see if I've got angry faces or smiling faces at people, whether they challenge me or not on this. But from what I can see, intervention doesn't routinely happen. And what I mean by that, it is people will take care of each other, right? I'm not suggesting that people just ignore people and don't try to look after them. But it's not normal for a person that's been in the company, let's say a year, to go and talk to someone who's been in the company for 15 years or in the industry for 30 years and say, excuse me, I wonder if we could have a chat. I think the way that you're doing that, you know, might not be that safe. Can we explore it and understand it? That doesn't routinely happen from what I can see. Another observation is that actually, I think that our guys on the ground, and this isn't just from our own company, and I'm not suggesting, by the way, that the company or management put this pressure on people, but there is a feeling on the ground sometimes that we need to move things quickly and we need to get the job done. So, you know, our environment, our climate drives our behaviors. And if that's their perception, whether it's real or not, doesn't matter. We need to understand how to change that perception and understand that perception. And, you know, we have, as a sector, it's quite a traditional sector. And I say that not in a negative sense. I say that in a really positive sense. It's got lots of history. Today I was on a site where we looked at the historic, I think from 1930s accident book. Someone showed me the inside of the book, and there was a report of someone who twisted their knee. So, you know, some really good reporting even back then, which is fantastic. But it's a traditional industry. It's steeped in history, steeped in old ways of doing things, and that's fine. It's good. But also that brings with it some baggage and some, I guess, something that maybe slows us in terms of moving forward into more proactive ways of doing things. Like it or not, it's a male-dominated industry. The oil and gas industry is exactly the same. It's quite a macho industry. You know, people would rather take the mick out of each other than have a heart-to-heart conversation, or a soft conversation, if you like. But if we want these interventions to take place, that's a piece we've got to tackle, and we've got to move that on, because there's nothing more off-putting when someone makes an intervention to stop something going wrong. There's nothing more off-putting than someone turning around and saying, you know, bugger off, Pipsqueak, you've only been here 5 minutes. That person's never going to intervene again. And equally, you know, someone turning around and saying, you know, that'll never happen to me. I've been doing this 30 years. So we've got to get over that piece, I think, as well. And it's quite a transactional industry. The nature of what we do is quite transactional as well. But sometimes that means that our approach to things is transactional. Everything is an action. Everything is on a list to get after. Actually, some of the softer stuff that we might want to tackle around human beings is not that transactional. It's hearts and minds, and it's understanding that and getting into that kind of willingness to understand those challenges. So, jump back very, very quickly to this. Refer you back to this image, and suggest, you know, on an ongoing basis, ask yourself where you are as an individual. Ask yourself where your organization is, your sights are on this, and what can you do to be moving up that ladder all the time. Okay, I will stop sharing that. Apologies, I've overrun slightly. It wasn't too bad, and I hope that was useful. I can see the room again now, so hello everybody. I hope that was useful and a little bit insightful, a little bit of my background, a little bit of my what I've seen in this sector, and I'm happy to take any questions or challenges. Or happy to just leave the room.
Can anybody hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. My name's Mike Martin. I was fascinated by what you said, and I think it's very interesting. And I hope the industry, many industries, listen to what you said. There are many examples of duties under Regulation 7. Many examples that you gave that of part of the investigation that that other questions should be asked rather than the accident itself. When you came to the rules, I work as just on a part-time consultancy. I was one of HM inspectors for many years. And one of the things I saw in rules, I shouldn't say, it's possibly a bit rude, and I may be shouting down, but what we do need to know to give is reading classes. And when people enter sites, many don't realise that the rule at the gate are the rules on site, and it's very, very common that that the workforce, including very senior managers, take no notice of it. And I'm very interested in your behaviour as well. So you've got from me, for what it's worth, of course, is a big plus. And you know, we've got to listen as an industry and move on to cultural changes with some urgency. So all I would say is thank you very much. I listened very carefully, and I hope everybody else take notice of it. So thank you.
No, thank you. Appreciate it.
Any more questions? No. John, I'd just like to thank you for your presentation. It was absolutely excellent. Just to summarise, you've talked about cultural and human behaviour, standby effects, knowing and doing gaps, ensuring that root cause analysis is actually achieved rather than human error. One of the other things which comes to my mind is it safety by accident or safety by design? Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
So I'd just like to thank you, and I'd like the audience to thank you in the usual manner.